When the old man asked, "Is this you in the photo?" he didn't know he was about to give Jake the answer he'd searched for 20 years. Welcome to Secret Stories. Before we continue this incredible story of lost family, unexpected discovery, and a delivery that changed 2 lives forever, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us share these powerful narratives. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of our community. Jake Mitchell adjusted his quick ship uniform and checked his delivery schedule one more time. 22 years old, a junior at Boston University studying business administration, Jake worked part-time for the delivery company to pay for his modest apartment and cover expenses that his partial scholarship didn't handle. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave him flexible hours around his class schedule. What made Jake different from most college students wasn't just his work ethic or his determination to succeed despite financial challenges. It was the emptiness that had followed him since childhood, the questions that had no answers, the family history that simply didn't exist. Jake had been found at age 2, wandering alone in a Boston park with no identification, no family, and no memory of where he came from. The authorities had searched extensively, but no missing child reports matched his description. No family ever came forward to claim him. He became a ward of the state, moving through foster homes until he aged out of the system at 18. The name Jake Mitchell wasn't even his real name. Social services had given it to him when they couldn't determine his identity. Mitchell was the last name of the police officer who found him, and Jake was simply a name the caseworker thought suited him. For 20 years, he had carried this borrowed identity, always wondering who he really was, where he came from, and whether somewhere out there, someone was still looking for him. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Jake's delivery route took him through the tree-lined streets of Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most historic neighborhoods. His van was loaded with the usual assortment of packages, documents, and parcels that needed to reach their destinations before noon. His last stop was 42 Marlborough Street, a beautiful brownstone that had clearly been someone's cherished home for decades. The address belonged to Henry Wilson, and according to Jake's delivery app, the package required a signature. Jake climbed the front steps and rang the doorbell, hearing the soft chime echo through the house. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a distinguished-looking man in his mid-70s. Henry Wilson had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, silver hair that suggested he'd once been quite handsome, and the gentle bearing of someone who had spent his life working with people. "Mr. Wilson, I have a delivery for you," Jake said, holding up his electronic tablet for the signature. "Of course, young man. Please come in for a moment. I've been expecting this package for weeks." Henry's voice carried the warm tone of a retired teacher, which indeed he was, having spent 40 years educating Boston's children before retiring a decade earlier. Jake stepped into the foyer, immediately struck by the warmth of the home. The walls were lined with photographs, bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, and everything spoke of a life well lived and memories carefully preserved. "The package is from California," Jake noted, reading from his tablet. "Sender is listed as Margaret Chen." Henry's face lit up with recognition. "Maggie, she was one of my teaching colleagues. We've been corresponding for months about some old photographs she found in the school archives. Please, set it on the table there." As Jake placed the package on the antique wooden table in the hallway, Henry began carefully opening it with scissors, moving slowly and deliberately, as older people often do with anticipated treasures. "You know," Henry said as he worked, "when you reach my age, packages like this become quite special. They're usually full of memories rather than things you actually need." Jake watched politely, not wanting to rush the elderly man, but conscious of his remaining deliveries. However, something about Henry's gentle manner and the obvious joy he took in this simple moment made Jake want to linger. The package contained what appeared to be a large manila envelope and several smaller items wrapped in tissue paper. Henry opened the envelope first, and Jake could see it was filled with old photographs, some in black and white, others in the faded colors of decades past. "These are from Jefferson Elementary," Henry explained, spreading some of the photos on the table. "I taught there for 30 years. Maggie found these in a storage room they were cleaning out." As Henry sorted through the photographs, his hand suddenly stopped. He picked up one particular photo and stared at it intently, his expression changing from joy to something more complex, deeper. "My goodness," he whispered, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. Jake, curious despite himself, glanced at the photograph in Henry's hands. It showed a family of 3, a young couple and a toddler, all smiling at the camera. The photo had Jake Mitchell, 2003, written in neat handwriting at the bottom. Jake's blood ran cold. He stared at the photograph, then at Henry, then back at the photo. "Excuse me, sir, but did you say that was Jake Mitchell?" Henry looked up at Jake with tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Yes, this is my grandson, Jake Mitchell. He would be about your age now if..." His voice trailed off as he really looked at Jake for the first time. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Mr. Wilson, I am Jake Mitchell. I was found when I was 2 years old, right here in Boston. No one ever knew where I came from." Henry's hands began to shake as he held the photograph. "Is this you in the photo?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake took the photo with trembling hands and studied it carefully. The little boy in the picture had the same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same distinctive birthmark on his left wrist that Jake had carried his entire life. "It's me," Jake said, his voice breaking. "This is me." Henry sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the impossibility and the miracle of the moment. "Jake, my Jake, I've been looking for you for 20 years. Through tears and halting words, Henry began to tell Jake the story he had never known. Jake's parents, Lisa Wilson Mitchell and Michael Mitchell, had been Henry's only daughter and son-in-law. Lisa was a dedicated elementary school teacher, just like her father, and Michael was a pediatric resident at Massachusetts General Hospital. In November 2005, when Jake was just 2.5 years old, Lisa and Michael had been driving home from a medical conference when their car was hit by a drunk driver. Both had been killed instantly. Jake, who had been staying with a babysitter that weekend, became an orphan in a single devastating moment. "The social worker called me," Henry explained, his voice heavy with old grief. "They said they were placing you in temporary care while they processed the paperwork for me to take custody. But when I went to pick you up the next day, they said you were gone. There had been some kind of administrative error, a miscommunication. They had moved you to a different facility, but they wouldn't tell me where. Privacy laws, they said." Henry had spent months fighting through bureaucracy, hiring lawyers, and pleading with anyone who would listen. But somehow, in the chaos of an overwhelmed system, Jake had slipped through the cracks. His case file had been misfiled, his temporary placement had become permanent, and his connection to Henry had been lost entirely. "I never stopped looking," Henry said, pulling out a thick folder from a nearby drawer. "I hired private investigators, posted on missing children websites, contacted every social services office in New England. I had your photo in newspapers, on milk cartons, anywhere they would put it." Jake looked through the folder with amazement. It contained years of correspondence, investigation reports, newspaper clippings, and dozens of copies of that same family photo. Henry had spent thousands of dollars and countless hours searching for the grandson who had vanished into the system. "How did you get this photo?" Jake asked, holding up the picture that had started it all. Henry smiled through his tears. "Your mother sent it to Maggie Chen about a month before the accident. Maggie was Lisa's mentor teacher when she first started at Jefferson Elementary. Lisa was so proud of you, always sharing pictures and stories. Maggie kept that photo all these years, and when she found it in her old files, she thought I might want to have it." The irony was overwhelming. The photograph that revealed Jake's identity had been sitting in a storage room for 20 years, only to find its way back to Henry through a retired teacher's kindness, arriving at the exact moment when Jake happened to be the one delivering it. "What happened to me after the accident?" Jake asked. "Why couldn't they find you?" Henry pulled out more documents. "I finally got some answers about 10 years ago when I threatened to sue the state. Apparently, there were 2 Jake Mitchells in the system at the same time. The other boy was older, from a different family situation, and there was a paperwork mix-up. By the time they realized the error, you had already been moved 3 times, and somehow your file got separated from your parents' death certificates." Jake learned that he had been placed with his first foster family under an assumed identity, created when social services couldn't verify his background. The system, overwhelmed and understaffed, had essentially given up trying to connect him to his family history. "I never stopped believing I would find you," Henry said. "Every year on your birthday, every Christmas, every major holiday, I would set an extra place at the table, just in case. I kept your parents' room exactly as they left it. I saved every toy, every book, every piece of clothing you might have grown into." Henry led Jake upstairs to what had been his parents' room. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Photos of Jake as a baby and toddler covered every surface. His parents' wedding pictures, graduation photos, and family memories filled the walls. In the closet, Henry had saved boxes of toys, clothes in various sizes, and even a college fund that he had continued to contribute to for 20 years. "I always believed that somehow, someday, you would come home," Henry said. "I just never imagined it would be because you were delivering your own family photos to me." Jake spent the rest of that day and late into the evening learning about his family. He discovered that his father had been brilliant and compassionate, dreaming of specializing in treating children with rare diseases. His mother had been artistic and nurturing, planning to become a principal someday so she could help even more children. Henry showed Jake home videos from before the accident. Jake watched himself taking his first steps, celebrating his 2nd birthday, playing in the very house where he now sat. He heard his mother's voice calling his name, saw his father's hands teaching him to stack blocks, witnessed the love that had surrounded him in those first precious years of life. "They loved you so much," Henry said, his voice full of the pride and pain that had sustained him through 2 decades of searching. "Every decision they made was about giving you the best life possible. They would be so proud of the man you've become." Jake learned that he came from a family of educators and healers. Henry's father had been a professor, his grandmother a nurse. Education and service to others were family traditions that Jake had somehow internalized even without knowing his heritage. "Is that why I chose business school?" Jake asked. "I always said I wanted to help people, but I never knew why that felt so important." Henry smiled. "Your mother used to say you were going to be a leader, that you had this way of bringing people together even as a toddler. Maybe that calling never left you." As the evening grew late, Jake faced a decision that would change everything. Henry invited him to move into his childhood home, to take the room that had been waiting for him for 20 years. Jake's small apartment suddenly seemed impossibly lonely compared to the warmth and history of the house on Marlborough Street. "I don't want to impose," Jake said, overwhelmed by the generosity and the sudden shift in his understanding of himself. "Impose?" Henry laughed. "Jake, I've been setting a place for you at dinner for 20 years. This house has been waiting for you to come home. The only thing that would impose on me is if you didn't accept." Jake moved in the following weekend. Henry helped him carry his few possessions up to the room that had been prepared for him since childhood. They established new routines and traditions, making up for lost time while creating fresh memories. Henry attended every one of Jake's remaining college events. When Jake graduated the following spring, Henry sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face as his grandson walked across the stage to receive his diploma. After the ceremony, Jake introduced Henry to his friends and professors as "my grandfather," words he had never been able to say before. Jake discovered that Henry owned a small publishing company that specialized in educational materials, a business he had built while teaching. When Henry offered Jake the opportunity to learn the business and eventually take it over, Jake realized that all his business classes had been preparing him for this moment he never saw coming. 6 months after that miraculous delivery, Jake and Henry had established the family routines they had both been missing. They had breakfast together every morning, with Henry sharing stories about Jake's parents and Jake telling Henry about his experiences in foster care and his dreams for the future. They visited Jake's parents' graves together, where Henry introduced Jake to the mother and father who had loved him more than life itself. Jake finally understood where his determination came from, why education felt so important to him, and why he had always felt drawn to helping others. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been your delivery driver that day?" Jake asked one evening as they sat in Henry's study, surrounded by books and family photos. Henry smiled and pointed to the window, where he had hung a small wind chime that had belonged to Jake's mother. "I think your parents had something to do with it. 20 years of searching, and you literally walked up to my front door." "Some things are meant to be, Jake. Some things are just meant to be." The delivery company QuickShip still has no idea that one of their routine deliveries reunited a family that had been torn apart by tragedy and bureaucratic failure. Jake still works for them part-time, but now it's by choice rather than necessity, and he takes special care with every package, knowing that any delivery might be carrying someone's miracle. Because sometimes the thing we've been searching for our entire lives is delivered right to our door. Sometimes the family we thought we'd lost forever is just a package away. And sometimes the most ordinary moment can become the most extraordinary reunion when love refuses to give up and hope never stops, believing that somewhere, someone is still looking for us. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a coincidence that felt like more than chance? Share this video because everyone deserves to remember that families can be reunited in the most unexpected ways and that love truly can find a way home.